Welcome to Friday night's video in our Master Series. This is the 108th video in our Master Series and the 5th video in our group mixing phase. So basically, as we get started here, you might want to stop the video here. We talked a little bit about main concerns and things. And basically, if you want to stop the video and make some notes about this or take some pictures of it, this is what I normally go through as I'm bringing things together. And it's just basically a workflow for me to make me recheck things. If you've gone through mixing concepts and you've gone through everything we talked about so far, that you'll work out your own workflow that's going to be really, contoured to what you do. I do a lot of very diversified or a lot of diverse things. So if I was doing all just reggae, my workflow would be a lot better laid out. I can tell you that. And it's like, just make some snapshots of it and go through it. And as we go through the mixing, start getting yourself a workflow together and a checklist and things like that to go through. Now, we had talked about, gain staging, how important it is to really get used to checking out your peak and your RMS and using at least a couple different meters on each individual track so that you can, really see what's going on as you're mixing a couple tracks together, that you've got, you might have either one track or two or three tracks that are going to the meter, and then you're bringing the next one up into it and you're looking at it on its own meter to really see how you're bringing it up, because you're starting out at somewhere between -3 and -12 or even -16 dB, to start out, and then start bringing things up underneath it. So it's a really huge concept to get used to, and looking at your meters and seeing what's going on, because sometimes it's better to look at peak and sometimes it's better to look at RMS, depending on how much dynamic things you got going on that are bouncing around. And to really take that into consideration and being able to, the concept itself, you apply it well, but you will see a lot of that when we get going. In your stereo field work, you should have by now, we addressed a lot of it in, group mixing and putting things where you wanted them. In your individual tracks, everything should be pretty much laid out. You might have a couple different plans, because we talked about a moving stereo field to where, well, in the intro, this here is where everything's at. This is where it's at in its place. And then I've got a different piece of paper that's got it set out for when the verse starts. Or a break. The break's laid out like this, and then the verse is laid out like this, and the chorus is laid like this. You need to really lay that out. And just remember, one of the key things as we're going through mixing, that if I don't address that a lot, that you just kind of have to, every individual movement and transition and break, you need to redo that and rethink that, and just be careful of really rapid automation moves. When you're doing it with the automation and you're moving the panning thing around with your automation, make it a little gradual. Make a little gradient there instead of just it straight up and down going from death to here and that. Make a little bit of a gradient of it. I will show you that a little bit when we do volume automation, when we start actually mixing. But that right there should be laid out, so you adjust that as you go along from each individual movement, and we will address that a little bit also. So basically, as we get into the mixing, that there's some concepts that we want to talk about. First of all, as we're getting set up, that all of your tracks and your arrangement is all arranged really nice. You clean it up real well. You've got fades on all of your events and things like that, so you got no clicks, plops, and bleeps going on. And it's all nice and pretty and just laid out really nice. And on all your tracks, any settings that are associated with your track that you have set correctly, and that you have made notes of any other things that you did that you rendered onto that track. That might have been, detunings, delays, pannings, or whatever you might have done that you might have rendered onto there, they have really good notes about it. And so when you start mixing that, you can go back and go, why does that sound like it's that? What's going on? That you got really good notes about what you've done. So basically, when we get done with that, we're getting into the actual mixing. Now, we don't have any individual tracks to work with on this. Everything is a bunch of groups. So there's a bunch of subgroups in this mix that I'm showing you going to buses. So you have to deal with any individual tracks that they would have their own bus that comes off it, just like these subgroups, and you would deal with them the same. and go back to those individual tracks or those individual tracks in the subgroup and deal with any issues you might be having. So just kind of keep that in mind. So basically, on all my tracks, that I've got them all set at most to -6 dB. All of them across the line, no matter how I've mixed them or what I've done, at most, like if I've got a group of 3, whatever one is louder than any of the other ones, at most it would be -6 dB to give myself some headroom. So that's across the line on all these tracks. Then the next thing we were talking about is buses. I've went through and made a bus for each individual subgroup, and I've put the preset that we had for spatialization, being a reverb and an echo effect. I'm using analog delay in my DAW for the echo effect. And on any tracks that aren't the out front tracks, I've put a track delay that we'll talk about, because that's going to be going on this mix also, because it's a very pertinent engineering concept that can really help out a lot. Now, with those also, all those individuals groups, I've made a VCA fader for. That way that if I have an individual track in this drum group, I can go address this individual track. I have to turn it up or down a little bit. But if I need that entire drum group to go up a little, down or a little bit, I can make every one of those faders go up and down a little bit with my VCA fader from here. So I don't have to fuss with it here in my bus and things like that, or go back and select all of them here and bring them up or down. I can just do it right from my VCA fader. And that's set at -3 also. And all of my buses are set at -3. Now, all my buses are sent to my leveling bus. This one isn't here. It should be, but it's not for this moment because I'm getting ready to address something else. They're all sent to a leveling bus. Now, the leveling bus, basically, when I get into processing, that all those, after I do all my mixing with those individual buses, with automation from all the buses I've created from all the individual tracks and all those subgroups, that they go to this leveling bus. So any tuning I need to do with levels, that I do with automation from the leveling bus. That way I can fine tune it. And sometimes you can even make the decision to mix each individual movement unto itself and keep it under clipping, and then just do the automation of the dynamic differences between movements and sections with your automation bus. That is an option. I'm not sure that I'll show you that through this series, but I may. Now, all this bus, normally when I start processing in the next phase, this will go to each individual bus that I use for processing. Equalization, stereo field work, compression limiting, whatever I'm going to do. It's going from this leveling bus to those buses, and then from there it goes to this main out bus to the main out. Does that way that my main out is reserved just for visualization and tools to analysis tools, excuse my language. And that's basically my setup. And I have 2 other buses. One of them is called meter 1, and one of them is called metering. This is to meter what's going on. All of these buses have a send coming off of them, every one of them, to metering. That way I have all my metering tools on here. Level meters, phase meters, scopes, spectrometers, equalization meters, all my meters, tonal balance meters to see what's going on with my tonal balance, and they're all sent to there. And I have another one that has basically all those same meters on it that I use for doing sends. That way that if I go in here and I'm doing my chorus and I run through my chorus, that I have meters for this. That way I can go into my mixing here and I can go, say I can have my first bus here going to metering. This is my vocals, right? And then that's going to that metering 1 bus. Right, and so that way I can pull out like an EQ on there, and I can sidechain in this harmony. This is the first thing that I'm going to mix in together, because I start with the out front track and then work down. So then I can see the harmony in purple here, and then bring it up. I got auditory. I can hear what's going on as I bring in gain stage. I've set the level of the vocals, and then the main vocals, and then the harmonies, the the support tracks I'm bringing up underneath it, and then I got a visual of both of them working together like that. Whereas this other metering is just metering it straight out, so I can just take a look and see what everything looks like mixed together. And as I go along, then when I get done mixing in the harmonies, then I'll send both of those, the harmonies here and the out front vocals to I'll send the harmonies and the vocals to that metering one, and then I will sidechain in whatever I'm bringing up underneath it to visualize it. So it's a really good practice to get into doing, and it can make it really helpful in making you being able to, while you're visualizing and being able to hear things that are going on. So when you start mixing things together and you start gain staging and bringing things in, that you can look at it a couple different ways and really see what's going on. You can look at the differences of them blending in, coming together, and you can look at them and look like what do they look like combined. There might be an issue, a frequency issue, or a low end issue, or a high end issue you're hearing that you can visualize and say, yeah, and where's it coming from? It's coming from, well, it's pretty obvious, it's coming from my guitars. I'm looking at on this bus, that on the equalization it's coming from the guitars. Obviously, is it really showing it's a problem here? And going back and forth and being able to use them both well besides just your ears. And I got my headphones sitting there so that I listen to each section as I go along, not only through my monitors and visualizing it, but also through my headphones, so I can really do a good job of doing that. So the next thing we wanted to talk about is putting two different type of EQs on each one of your buses and each one of your individual tracks, and that is equalization. If you're going to put other types of effects on these tracks, is great. You might put who knows what on the buses once you start mixing to add something in there. I don't know what it might be, who knows what it might be, but your main concern is going to be equalization. The first thing you want to deal with is so you can do high and low pass filtering. As you start mixing things together, sometimes you might need to cut out some high end content to make it sound better in the mix, or cut out some low end content to make it sound better in the mix, or to help kind of clean it up. And you also might have another equalizer on there to do some work. It needs to get boosted. Go along the equal loudness contour guidelines first about where you should attenuate and boost. Start there and then look for problems. But you might have another equalizer on there to adjust issues. I need to turn the high end up a little bit. I need to bring it up a little bit there, or down a little bit over here, or wherever, to have a couple different equalizers on there for fine tuning those buses and being able to go fine tune any one of those individual tracks. You might get in there and then realize that your hi-hat actually needs some work. So you don't want to work off your EQs here on the buses. You want to go back to that individual track and go, well, now my EQ here, I don't know if I need to high-low pass filter it or nothing. I'll listen to it, but I know I might, but I know for certain that I need to give it a little bit out, boost in the high end, because it's just not cutting through the mix and it doesn't sound right. So those are two things you're going to have on there. And you need to really think about any effects you might be putting on any of them. And the other thing is effects bus. Now you might, whatever type of effects that you might be routing them to, have effects buses set up and on there with the effect that you're putting on there. Because on a chorus or something, you might, be running some kind of flanger or phaser or who knows what to an effects bus for, the vocalist or the guitar or who knows what. And it could be anything, and effects buses to think about those things and get it set up. You have your effects buses set up. I try to do most things from the individual tracks, but sometimes I will use effects buses for things that are like, no, I know I want that on there just for some section, or I want it on there for the whole thing, and I didn't render it on there. I'm not sure how much I want on there, so I'm just going to send it to an effects bus and then start bringing the level in. I'll have it sent to it, and then, or, create an FX bus for it or whatever, and then bring as much of it I want going to there to add as much of effect that I want to add into there once I've mixed it together, that it mixed together sound good. Now how much of that effect can I put in there without it screwing up the mix? Does that make sense, or causing issues with the rest of the mix? And normally I wait until I've pretty much done with the mix before I start adding that kind of stuff in there. So that's the first video and getting set up. In the next video, we'll talk about a couple different things before we get actually started mixing. See you in the next video.